Now, I mentioned Peter Senge earlier. He also has a model of change described in his book, The Necessary Revolution, where he draws a distinction between whether you're doing it internally or with others, say consultants or a support system, and whether you're focused on what's happening today or what's happening in the future. And he would argue that most change agents stay below this line, that is, they are always thinking about yesterday in Emerson's terms, and not so much about where we're going to be in the future, this issue of visioning, which we talked about with regard to organizational charters, that most people have a very difficult time thinking ahead, that they look at the short term, and hence you get this short-term objective phenomenon that we see in the stock market and in the management of many corporate entities. So Senge's model of change, he came and gave a talk at our school, plus you can read his book. His argument that it could come from anywhere, could come from the bottom, it could come from the middle. They might have different characteristics in how they're managed depending on the original source. But it's important that they be organized in groups and teams rather than individuals. So if there's only one person trying to lead the change, that's not going to work very well. But you only need maybe a few. You don't need hundreds of people. But if you can get, remember Cotter's notion of a guiding coalition, or a small group of a guerrilla team almost. And then he would argue at level 2, the way you start this process is by interjecting new ways of thinking, new concepts, new ideas. And almost like a snowball, this sort of starts a process. If you can then, in terms of making your language memorable, and remember our earlier segment on the language of leadership, find stories to tell about how value can be created, and that because they're stories, people won't forget them. So again, go back to your life story exercise and the lessons that we took from that. And then he would say, you need to spend time hanging out with people, being there, being a listener, a mediator, a facilitator, a catalyst, encouraging people. And he argues it might take 3 years or more of doing this. And then an emphasis on networking, so you get more and more people who are involved, more and more people who understand the concepts. And then it spreads slowly. I'm a fan of zoysia grass, which is a kind of grass that doesn't grow with seed. It sends out little runners. So you can imagine you plug a little bit of this in the ground and then it gradually spreads out. Seems very similar to the process that Senge is describing. And then you wait until you begin to hear these new ideas and thoughts coming back around. And he would argue that your success depends on the richness of your networks. So we talked about that earlier in our team building segment, the importance of building networks and how some people do that naturally, whereas other people maybe not so much. So we come back to the northern ball and your personal characteristics and skill sets around building a network. Create visual images for people. So now we're dealing again with the northern ball and how people learn. Some people learn by listening to stories. Other people learn better by seeing things. So Senge is arguing that with stories and images, you can help people cement or include these ideas in their new way of thinking. Don't waffle. You know, how many organizations have a new theme or a new image or a new vision every 6 months or every year? Over 3 years, he's arguing, have a consistent vision of where you want to go. And then remember that, wait a minute, people can mess it up. So don't be careful of your own influence and whether you're trying to create too much problem by getting involved and putting your own flavor on it. Allow the thing, in his sense, to organically grow, as we were discussing about zoysia grass.